Don't go home. Those were the exact words our maid whispered into my ear as I stood beside my car, still holding my suitcase. I remember staring at her because I had never seen fear on her face before. Not like that. She had worked for our family for 10 years. She had seen my wife and me argue, celebrate birthdays, raise our daughter, survive my father's funeral, and rebuild our lives after losing nearly everything in a bad investment. But that evening, she looked like someone who had just discovered a body. "Mr. Daniel," she said again, her voice trembling. "Please, don't go home." I glanced toward the house. The lights were on. My wife's car was in the driveway. Everything looked normal. That was what made her warning so terrifying. "What happened?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not here. Please get back in your car. Maria, you're scaring me." She grabbed my wrist. "Check your cameras." Then she stepped away from me as if she was afraid someone might see us talking. I got back into my car. I didn't drive away. Instead, I opened the security app on my phone and pulled up the footage from our living room. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then I saw my wife. She was standing beside the fireplace. And she wasn't alone. The man standing in front of her was my younger brother, Michael. I watched them talking. Then Michael reached into his coat and handed her a thick envelope. My wife opened it. She looked inside. And then she smiled. Not the smile she gave me. Not the warm smile I remembered from our wedding photographs. It was the smile of someone who had just received exactly what they wanted. I turned the volume up. The recording caught my wife's voice. "Once Daniel signs the papers, everything will be finished." My fingers went cold. Michael answered. "Are you sure he won't suspect anything?" She laughed softly. "He trusts me." I stopped breathing for a second. I replayed those words 3 times. He trusts me. I had spent 18 years trusting that woman. I had built my entire adult life around her. And apparently, she had been quietly planning a life without me. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part came when Michael asked, "What about the house?" My wife looked toward the camera. Then she said something that made me sit completely still. "The house will be his problem after the divorce. The company won't." I stared at the screen. My company. The company I had built from a rented office and one old computer. The company my father had helped me start. The company that now employed 43 people. Why was my wife talking about it as if it already belonged to someone else? I drove to a hotel that night. I didn't confront anyone. Not my wife. Not my brother. Not even Maria. I needed to understand what was happening before I made the mistake of letting them know I had discovered it. For 18 years I had believed my marriage was imperfect but real. Now I wasn't sure if any of it had been real. My wife, Claire, and I had met when we were both 26. She was working at a small design firm, and I was trying to keep my business alive. I wasn't rich. I wasn't impressive. I had one old car, a mountain of debt, and more ambition than common sense. Claire believed in me when almost nobody else did. At least, that's what I had always believed. When our daughter Emily was born, Claire left her job for several years to stay home with her. I worked constantly. There were nights when I didn't get home until after midnight. I missed dinners. I missed school events. I missed more than I want to admit. Claire used to tell me, "We're doing this together." Those words stayed with me. Even during our worst years. Especially during our worst years. 3 years earlier, my father died unexpectedly. His death left me his old house outside the city, along with a small investment account. I sold the house and put most of the money into my company. That decision changed everything. Within 2 years, the company became profitable. We moved into a beautiful home. We traveled. Emily started college. And somehow, I convinced myself that our difficult years were behind us. Looking back, I realized that's when Claire changed. Or maybe that's when I finally stopped noticing. She became interested in my business finances. At first, I thought it was normal. Then she began asking questions about ownership. What happens if something happens to you? What happens to the company if we divorce? What percentage belongs to me? I laughed the first time. You're my wife. Why are you talking like my lawyer? She didn't laugh. Because people change, Daniel. I thought she was worried about the future. I didn't realize she was preparing for it. The next morning, I called my accountant, Robert. I didn't tell him everything. I simply asked him to review the company records and our recent transactions. His silence during our phone call lasted too long. Daniel, he finally said, there's something you need to know. My stomach tightened. What? There have been several transfers. Transfers? From the business account. How much? He gave me the figure. I had to sit down. It was enough money to destroy the company if I didn't act quickly. Where did it go? Several consulting firms. Do I know them? No. Who authorized them? He hesitated. Your wife had access. I closed my eyes. Suddenly, the envelope and the security footage made sense. But then Robert said something even worse. One of those companies is registered to your brother. Michael. My own brother. The man I had defended for years. The man I had helped after his divorce. The man I had loaned money to when his business failed. I remembered him standing beside me at my father's funeral, telling me, "We're all we have left." I almost laughed when I remembered it. That afternoon, I met Maria in a quiet cafe. She looked exhausted. I should have told you sooner, she said. Why didn't you? Because your wife threatened me. My jaw tightened. What did she threaten? She said she'd make sure I never worked in the city again. Maria looked down at her hands. She also told me she knew about my son's medical bills. That explained her fear. But Maria hadn't stayed silent completely. She had started collecting evidence. She showed me photographs, copies of documents, dates, notes, and one photograph that made my blood run cold. It showed Claire meeting a man I didn't recognize. They were outside a bank. The photograph was dated 6 months earlier. Who is he? Maria shook her head. I don't know. I took the photograph home to my hotel. For hours I stared at it. Then I recognized the man. He was the attorney who had handled my father's estate. That made no sense. Unless my father's estate had something to do with this. I called Robert again. He searched through the old records. Then he found it. A clause in my father's estate documents. The money from the sale of his property had been placed into my company under conditions that protected it from certain marital claims if the funds could be traced. I had never paid much attention to that language. Claire had. And suddenly I understood the bigger plan. She wasn't simply trying to take money. She was trying to make the money look like marital property by moving it through companies controlled by Michael. Then, during the divorce, she could argue that the business had been built with shared marital assets. But why? Why go to that much trouble? That question kept me awake. The answer came 3 days later. I returned home while Claire was out. I didn't touch anything. I simply searched through the documents in my study. Inside an old filing cabinet, behind my father's estate papers, I found a folder I had never seen before. Inside was a copy of a letter. It was from my father. And it was addressed to Claire. I read it twice. Then a third time. My father had discovered that Claire was having financial problems years earlier. He had also discovered something else. Michael had been borrowing money from her. Not recently. For years. Claire had been secretly paying off my brother's debts. My brother hadn't just joined her plan. He had been depending on her. And then I found the final document. A handwritten note from my father. It said that if I ever discovered my brother had attempted to take control of my company, I was to protect Emily's future before protecting my pride. I sat in that room for a long time. I had spent days believing my wife was betraying me. Now I realized my family had been tied together by secrets I had never understood. But there was still one thing I couldn't explain. Why had Claire stayed married to me for so long? That answer came from Maria. She called me that night. "Mr. Daniel," she said, "there's something else." "What?" "She knows you saw the cameras." My blood ran cold. "How?" "She asked me why I warned you." I looked toward the hotel window. "Where are you?" "At your house." "Leave." "I can't." "Maria, leave now," she whispered. "Your wife is here." Then the phone went silent. I drove home. When I entered the house, Claire was sitting at the kitchen table. Maria was standing near the door. Michael was beside the window. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Claire looked at me. And strangely, she didn't look angry. She looked tired. "I know," she said. I put my keys down. "How long?" She lowered her eyes. 7 years. 7 years? I felt something inside me collapse. 7 years of what? Lying. Michael stepped forward. "Daniel, listen." "Don't." He stopped. I looked at Claire. "Was there ever a time when you loved me?" She began crying. And that hurt more than anger would have. "Yes," she whispered. "Then why?" She wiped her face. "Because I thought you were going to leave us. I never planned to leave you. I know that now." "No. You don't get to say that." She looked toward Michael. "My brother had debts. Huge ones. I thought if I helped him quietly, I could keep the family together." I stared at her. "You stole from my company." "I told myself I was borrowing." "You created fake companies." "I was desperate." "And you planned to divorce me." She didn't answer. That silence was the answer. Then Michael spoke. "She was going to leave you because she believed you were going to cut her out of everything." I looked at him. "Did you tell her that?" He didn't respond. I stepped closer. "Did you?" His face changed. And Claire suddenly looked at him. "What did you tell her?" Michael swallowed. "I told her Daniel was planning to change the ownership." I stared at my brother. "I never said that." "I thought you were going to." "You thought?" He looked away. Then Claire whispered, "Michael told me you had been meeting with a lawyer." I shook my head. "I was meeting with Robert because I was worried about the business." She looked at Michael. "You lied to me." Michael said nothing. And that was when the final piece fell into place. He had manipulated both of us. He convinced Claire that I was preparing to abandon her. He convinced me that Claire was secretly destroying everything. He wanted us to turn against each other while he moved money through the company. The betrayal wasn't just a marriage problem. It was a family scheme built on fear. I could have screamed. Instead, I sat down. I looked at Claire and said, "You should have asked me." She started crying. "I was afraid." So was I. For the first time in years, we were sitting across from each other without pretending. I didn't forgive her that night. I couldn't. Trust doesn't return because someone cries. It doesn't return because someone says they were scared. There were consequences. The company accounts were secured. The questionable transactions were documented. Michael had to face the financial consequences of what he had done. Claire and I separated. Months later, we began counseling, not because I knew whether we would stay married, but because Emily deserved parents who could speak to each other without turning her life into a battlefield. Maria stayed with us for another year before retiring. On her last day, I gave her an envelope. She refused it at first. "You already paid me for my work." "This isn't for your work," I told her. "It is for the courage you showed when everyone else was too afraid." She finally accepted it. Before she left, she looked at me and smiled. "You know, Mr. Daniel, I almost didn't call you that day." "I know." "What made you?" I thought about it. "Maybe because you knew something I didn't." She shook her head. "No. I called because you deserved the chance to know the truth before you made a decision you couldn't undo." Those words stayed with me. My marriage didn't fall apart because a maid warned me. It fell apart because for years, fear had replaced honesty. My wife had lied because she was afraid. My brother had manipulated us because he was afraid of losing money. And I had buried myself in work because I was afraid that if I stopped building something, I would discover how much of my family I had already lost. Sometimes I think about that evening when Maria grabbed my wrist beside the car. One sentence changed everything. Don't go home. At the time, I thought she was warning me about what I might find inside that house. Now I understand. She wasn't really warning me about my home. She was warning me about the life I thought I knew. And as painful as the truth was, I would rather live with an ugly truth than spend another 18 years inside a beautiful lie.